we get to chat through one of the articles that you wrote, Allison. So you wrote an article called Anger 101. Seems simple, really isn't, right? So if you want to jump in and tell us who this article was written to.
Yeah, of course. So I wanted to write this article on this topic on anger specifically, just because I feel like, at least in my experience in the Christian church, it's not something that gets a lot of attention. It's something that we kind of like put into this bucket of, well, that's not bad. Like God says to not let the sun go down on your anger, right? Like, or
right. And then that's like, okay, cool. That's it.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, I'm not supposed to be angry is kind of the takeaway. And so I really wanted to bust some of the myths around that, if you will, and just like bring it to the light, because I think it's something that we universally as humans experience. Anger is something that we all feel at different times and to different degrees. And so really trying to shed some light on that, for people who maybe feel like that's not okay, or if they struggle with anger and they have a hard time managing it, but feel like they can't really talk to people in the church about it because it's kind of one of those taboo topics that we're not always good at addressing. And so, yeah, just wanting to normalize the experience of anger for people and also shed light on just some different experiences within that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you talk about it. I feel like you said, like it's not talked about a lot. And I think when it is, it's very simplified and kind of dumbed down. But it's much more complicated than that, right? So you talk about in your article that there are different kinds of anger, right? There's like a healthy anger and there's a not so healthy anger. So I wanted to know if you could just kind of talk through the differences, what is a healthy anger, a God honoring anger, and what is just defensive anger and not healthy.
Yes, yeah, of course, which can feel really confusing in the moment, I think, for a lot of people, because when we're angry, we're just angry.
Right, where our emotions are like super heightened. It's hard to even I feel like when I get to a level of anger, it's hard for me to separate from like that emotion and go back to truth.
Yes.
Which is why it's so important to like know beforehand, before I ever get angry, like what is not okay.
Yes, yes. So first off, I think just as a disclaimer, before we get too in the weeds, I want to make sure we differentiate between anger and aggression, right? Like being angry and feeling angry, the emotion of anger is different from someone acting out in anger, right? So that would be like saying mean things, name calling, belittling, abusive language in any way. It can also be like physical aggression, right? Like hitting, throwing things, punching walls, like that's not what we're talking about. That's aggression, right? And that is never okay, right? We never want to say, well, it's normal and okay for me to feel angry, and so it's okay that I'm acting in these ways. That's not what we're saying at all. Aggression and anger are two separate things. And so I just want that to be super clear out of the gate here, that I'm not excusing or making it okay that people act aggressively or violently. That is never okay, right? As Christians, we're called to love people well, even when we're experiencing big emotions like that.
Yeah, I love that you said that. That's good.
Yeah. And I think also too, like it's important that we like take all the thoughts captive, right? And that we're in the driver's seat whenever we are feeling big emotions, which I think is why anger can be so hard to manage sometimes. Because like you were saying, Tori, like when we're in that space, it's like, it's hard to bring our minds back under control, right? When we're feeling really big emotions, the part of our brain that is in charge of that kind of starts going nuts. And then the part of our brain that's good at being rational and logical and like coherent kind of gets overwhelmed and leaves the party, right? Our prefrontal cortex disengages when our limbic brain gets too overwhelmed. And so that's kind of nerd speak for saying like it's hard to think rationally when we're really, really angry, right? Or experiencing any emotion to a super big degree, right? So that's a big part of learning to manage your emotions, even in smaller moments, so that when bigger moments come, you kind of have those skills to rely on. So all that to say, when I like to think about kind of defensive anger and healthy anger. Defensive anger is usually directed at someone, right? Like if I feel angry, I'm angry at someone or something or a situation, right? Where I'm using it, going on the offensive instead of experiencing maybe a softer emotion that might be underneath that. So like in the article, I kind of like to think about defensive anger is like an ice, like the tip of the iceberg that you can see above the water, but there's a bunch of other stuff underneath the surface of the water that's like holding that thing up that we can't see.
Right. I was going to say like there's fear and sadness and hurt
Yes.
and all of those different things that are the root of why we get angry.
Yeah, in that defensive way, because those softer emotions, that hurt, that fear, that sadness, feel so much more vulnerable and so much more scary. And so we don't want to go there because that's vulnerable, that's scary. If we go there, then we feel like we're open to any kind of attack or criticism. Like that's the whole point of vulnerability, right? Like Brene Brown talks about, where vulnerability is stepping out when we have no control over the outcome, right? And so if we say, hey, that really hurt me, that made me feel really sad when you said that, or when you did this, we're opening ourselves up to even more pain potentially, because that feels like we don't have control in that, right? And so sometimes anger can come in as a way to try to protect us from those feelings of vulnerability, right? It's a defense, something that we're using to protect that soft part of our hearts, right? When really what we're needing in that is connection, right? When we're feeling those softer emotions like sadness, fear, hurt, right? Even like disgust, like there's a lot of like, oh, I don't know what the outcome of this is going to be. I don't know if I'm going to be cared for. I don't know if the person I need to confront with this is gonna care about this, right? Or is even gonna pay attention to this or value this, right? And so then we just get angry, and it feels a little bit safer, right? Because then I'm in control. I'm in the driver's seat. I can be angry at you. It's your fault, right?
That's good. That's really good. Yeah, I'm feeling a little bit of conviction right now, because I know there are moments where I get angry, and I think of like my marriage and moments where I get angry at him, when in reality I have something that I'm not dealing with, that I need to deal with. And what, like you said, is more important in that moment is actually connecting with him, getting there, instead of just like blocking him off and being upset.
Yeah, making him the enemy instead of your partner.
Right. Yes. Because you're on the same team. Like,
Exactly.
right? Like, that's what a marriage should be. Like, you're on the same team, fighting for the same thing. And so, you know, I feel like it's going very against the design of marriage when we get angry and kind of make that person the enemy.
Exactly. Yeah. Because like biblically, you're one flesh, right? And so in a marriage, it's so easy to go there because we want to like protect those softer bits of our heart, right? And it's so scary, even in a covenant relationship, even in our marriage, to be vulnerable, right? Like you're talking about. And so it's tough to notice that. It's tough to put those things down, right? But like you said, you're on the same team. You guys are one flesh, according to scripture. And so if one person's getting torn down, you're both getting torn down, which is why like those things are so sacred and so important to protect against, right?
Yeah. So at the start of this, you know, you were saying kind of the way that the church approaches, you know, anger is sometimes not kind of oversimplified, and maybe just don't really get to the root of anger and all of that. So my question for you, and you talk a little bit about this in the article, but can you expand on what God says about anger?
Yeah. So it's interesting because like it's definitely in the Bible that says to not let the sun go down while you're angry, right? It says like in your anger do not sin, right? And so there is these spaces like that's the differentiation between anger and aggression. In that, at least that's how I understand and think about that verse, right? There's the difference between anger and aggression. Like being angry is normal and, like I said, even sometimes healthy, right? Like the healthy anger teaches us to set boundaries. It lets us know when like something either in us or in someone we love is getting violated, right? Something's happening that's not okay. So anger comes up to say, hey, this isn't okay. We need to set a boundary here. And that's really helpful and really important, right? So we don't want to kind of write anger off as a bad thing, right? But then I think when the Bible talks about like, let the sun go down while you're angry, how I kind of interpret that is to not ignore or not process anger, right? We don't want to have that feeling when it comes up and then be like, oh, wait, I'm not supposed to feel this, and push it down and shove it aside and not actually process through it, not actually figure out like, where is this coming from? What's happening in my circumstance or what's happening inside of me that I need to pay attention to, right? Because that's something that emotions are. They're indicators, right? They give us information about stuff that's happening in our world. They're incredibly important, right? They have like an action tendency. We need to do something with them, right? And I think too, like thinking back to like what you asked, what does God say about anger? I think we have great biblical examples of God experiencing anger, right? Like in the Bible, the times that God gets angry are when his people worship other gods, right? Or when other cultures, other nations actually hurt the Israelites, right? And Jesus gets mad when people use the temple for like financial gain instead of worship, right? Like it's this space of like idolatry, putting other gods before the God, right? Before Jesus. That's what gets him angry because it's not right, you know? And also when people hurt his kids, he gets angry because that's not right, right?
Yeah, I love that because I think we always go back to the Bible and examples of God or Jesus showing love or anything like that, which the anger can be a part of that too. But I think we always kind of skip over the passages and the parts that are like God angry because it's scary. Like we're like, oh my gosh, like that's someone you don't want to anger, right? So
yes, exactly.
But it's so important because it does set the precedent and the example for us to follow when it comes to those big, heavy emotions.
Yes. Like if you think about like so much the heart of the gospel is like taking care of the orphans and the widows in their distress, right? Like Jesus and God like give us a command to care for his people. And I think like the anger comes up. It's almost like what we kind of understand and call now social justice, right? Like those things aren't okay. And so we need to fight for kind of God's vision and God's desire, like bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth as best we can now in a fallen world, right? So that anger lets us know when something's not right or when someone needs an advocate, right? Or when something is coming in and taking the place of what should be God's role in our life, right?
Yeah,
An important red flag, flashing red light of like, something's not right here. Right?
So true. And I think of, when God isn't the center of our life and when we are idolizing other things, I mean, so much more of the anger and sin, that aggression or unhealthy anger like comes up in us.
Exactly. Yeah. It can be, I think like anything, anger is one of those things like that I think the enemy is super good at twisting to use against us, right? Like emotion in a lot of respects and a lot of other contexts is a connecting thing. Like we feel something and it draws us to someone else, right? And I think anger is one of those things that the enemy has taken and twisted to make it divisive, right? when really its heart is like having healthy relationship, right?
Yeah.
Anger, even in a marriage, can be like, oh, hey, actually that wasn't okay. I'm noticing that that made me really angry. And I think it's because like this is a boundary that's really important to me, right? And so it's finding what God intended for good in it, right? And not letting the enemy twist it and make it something that divides, right? But instead something that can bring together in a way that's made healthier and stronger, because we're learning more about ourselves and we're learning more about God's heart for community and God's heart for relationship.
So good, so good. And you said it, you've said it throughout, anger is a powerful emotion, and it's a big emotion, but there's so much underlying. And so it is important to process not just the anger, but everything that's beneath it, because you're not just getting angry, there's so much under that. So yeah, it's a huge emotion, and something that I know the enemy loves to use to divide people, to create tension in your spirit and all of these things. So practical tips, Allison, what are some practical tips for maybe avoiding that, defensive anger, and really just kind of following, I guess, what scripture says is healthy?
Yes, yes. So I think first off, what I'll say is if anger is something that like anybody listening to this struggles with, because I think a lot of people do, the first thing that I'll say is to just remember to breathe, right? I know that sounds like basic, but it's basic because it's helpful, right? Just remember to breathe, because breathing tells your body that you're okay. And the more that your body starts to slow down and regulate itself, the less you'll feel that space of like your brain just not connecting, like that you're just reacting and responding, right? Like I was saying earlier, like that limbic brain, if you can calm it down, then the part of your brain that's good at being rational can kind of get back online and help you out. So breathing is a great way to just slow yourself down so you can get back into that regulated space where you're in the driver's seat and the anger isn't in the driver's seat.
Have literally never thought of that, but that is such a good practical tip for those moments.
Yes, yes. And I think like because it's so common, just remembering like breathing and caring for yourself. Like so much of this stuff, Tori, at least the way I think about it, like mental health and these things, I think can operate a lot like our physical health. I think we're all really good at like, oh, I need to take care of my body. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to work out, or I'm going to like do some yoga or go on a walk, right? Like we're really good at making those things daily practices. And I think as we're talking about anger and like regulating, managing, taking care of those things, I think we need to kind of incorporate some daily mental health practices into that as well, and emotional mental health stuff, right? Like having moments where we actually slow down and engage in some mindfulness, right? Even daily, just taking 1 minute to like think about, how am I feeling today? What's happening inside of me today? Because all we're doing in that is building a muscle of awareness.
Right. And we're catching that anger or, whatever could flare up before it does.
Yes. So it could be that, or it could be like you're just building the muscle of figuring out what's happening inside of you, so that in these moments when things feel really big, it won't feel as mysterious or confusing or like, I don't know how I feel. I'm just mad. I'm just like upset. I'm just pissed off, whatever it is, right? We kind of do this thing of like, oh, I'm just mad. Like it doesn't matter. I don't want to engage with that. I don't want to feel, I don't even know how to, and I'm mad. And so I'm not going to take the time to do it. Right. But if we're engaging with kind of what's happening inside of us on a regular basis, then it won't feel as foreign when like the stakes are higher, I guess, you know?
Yeah, no, that's so good. So, so good. Do you have any other, tips that you would suggest to anybody who maybe struggles with, this kind of emotion?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I would encourage breath, right? Engage in mindfulness regularly, And then know also when to separate yourself if you're getting to that place. Or I've had some clients call it like a red out, like some people black out, right? But when anger gets so big and you're seeing red is what they call it. Like know when to take a time out and separate yourself. And that's okay. That if in the moment you're finding it hard to manage that, that's okay. Know when to remove yourself so that you can give yourself the space to process it. I think that's another thing that anger kind of gets in the way of. It cuts off that process that we don't give ourselves the space to understand because we're just overwhelmed in the moment, right? So learning to take just a time out in those spaces when you're feeling super angry, calm down, ask yourself a couple questions of like, where is this coming from, right? Is there a boundary here that I need to set, or is there something softer that I'm trying to protect, right?
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you so much for just expanding on so much of that. I know that, this resonates with all of us, really. I think this is something that all of us should read, all of us should reflect on. And I appreciate just all of your tips. And glad that you wrote that because I think that it's important to talk about.